Hey, you know what's scarier than not believing in God? Believing in him. I mean, really believing in him. It's a fucking terrifying thought. Welcome to Morally Offensive, the official podcast of Disappointing Your Parents. I'm Bill.
I'm Kevin.
And today we are continuing Hot Priest Summer with a film about one of the great, mysterious, mystical mysteries of the church, Stigmata.
This is a podcast about the films condemned or considered morally offensive by the Catholic Church.
We both grew up Catholic, and now we're not for reasons, but we're still fascinated by the religion that raised us. The films we cover are selected from the official film review lists of the Legion of Decency, RIP, and the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. I'm a motion graphics designer, editor, and DJ.
And I'm a brewery manager, a film podcaster, and a general enthusiast of all things media-related.
And together, we are on a journey to watch every film condemned or considered morally offensive. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Bill. Happy to be here.
Yeah, a lot of people probably have heard me on the A24 on the Rocks podcast for your Nosferatu episode.
It was a great episode.
Thank you. It's a great time to join you. And we were talking and realized you're a local guy. You're really close, right down the road.
Absolutely.
Cisco has needed a break, as I've pointed out before, and I'm trying to get a rotating panel of guests to come through. And so I reached out to you, immediately thought of you, reached out to you, and yeah, you agreed to do it, so thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. For those who don't know, my podcast is A24 on the Rocks, and Bill, like you just mentioned, was on an episode of our Vibe Discussions talking Nosferatu. We both realized we have a lot in common as far as our ex-Catholic background, and him living on the east side of Milwaukee, literally a couple blocks from where I used to call home on the east side as well, is just a match made in heaven. So super happy to be here. Thanks for bringing me on, and it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, totally. I'm really excited for this. What's your background with the Catholic Church?
Yeah, absolutely. So both of my parents were born and raised Roman Catholic. So being the eldest of 5 kids, I was, of course, raised in the church as well, baptized, First Communion. I was through elementary school, K through 8, at a Roman Catholic school. I had nuns teaching me, quite literally.
Oh, wow.
I had the nuns, so that's my authentic there. I went to church twice a week, as far as I can remember. I've been confirmed. When I get to high school, things started changing a little bit for me as I started getting into the public school system and getting some more of the free thinkers and some of my friends and some of my girlfriends and things. And they gave me a bunch of influences in my life. And by the time I got to college, it was full blown. I'm out of here. My other big influence is I am an Eagle Scout. So I went through the entire Boy Scouts of America, and a very big tenet of the Boy Scouts of America is a scout is reverent, which is the 12th point of the Scout Law. So reverence and religion and all of those things are been a tantamount part of the Boy Scouts. I've had several religious, what they call awards, I guess, from doing different things through the Catholic Church and Boy Scouting. And all of that kind of made me a little bit who I am, but it also showed me who I really didn't want to be, if that makes sense at the same time. So,
being an Eagle Scout, I also feel that. Very close to the Boy Scouts, Eagle Scout as well. Come from a family with a few Eagle Scouts, so yeah, it's definitely like tied to all of this, or the very American religious experience.
100%.
So yeah, that's awesome, man. Thank you for coming on the show again.
Of course.
And of course, it wouldn't be one of our shows without yet another guest.
Right.
Today I have a longtime friend of mine here who now lives in New York. We know each other from Chicago, from the music scene there, specifically like the alternative music scene. But Christopher Hoppe is our guest, and he is a brilliant film and literature scholar with a focus on horror. Chris, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, you're very welcome.
And I'm excited to talk about this movie with you. I know originally we had wanted to talk about the movie The Unholy, but I couldn't source a print of it anywhere.
I think there were about 3 different films we originally wanted to talk about, but I think this one goes with the whole Hot Priest Summer element.
It really does.
There was Angel Heart.
Yep.
Angel Heart was discussed.
Yep.
We discussed The Unholy with Ben Cross as the anguished priest who gets, tempted by a hot satanic seductress, and it takes place in New Orleans. But this is the sublimely 1999 premillennial tension era of Stigmata.
Yes.
With Billy Corgan doing the soundtrack. And I've not seen this movie in many years. I think the last time I watched it was probably when I bought the VHS tape, probably used at like a Blockbuster or something,
Yep.
where they throw it in the $3 bin.
Oh yeah.
And it is so sublimely, entertainingly out of this world, that it exists kind of in this like alternative universe that existed in film in the 90s, where everything is a cross between like a post Silence of the Lambs atmosphere, cross with Seven, cross with The Crow, where it's got these dark tones. And I'm trying to think, what is the movie that actually obliterates this technique? But everything is just all part of that whole, like, we're cashing in on that Q101 Alterna craze,
Right.
where, you know, everybody is thrown into a blender on this soundtrack. You have everybody from Sinead O'Connor to David Bowie, to Chumbawamba.
Thank you for looking up all the titles on the soundtrack, by the way.
And Massive Attack, appropriately for the, you know, sexy seduction scene, because it's the 90s and there's nothing more sexy than trip hop.
That is true.
That element of that. It just, so that was like one thing that I recognized immediately when watching this. And then the other thing too is like, Patricia Arquette goes to this club. It looks like the Limelight.
I love the club scene.
We're in Pittsburgh.
Yeah,
and everyone looks like a raver kid from you know, New York City, and you know, post kids Chloe Savini, you know, type looks of things. And it's so, and I just think of the, you know, that line from Goodfellas where, you know, Henry Hill says, I got my connection in Pittsburgh, you know, and this must be what he was talking about. This is the connection
specifically.
These are the drug crazed club kids that he was fueling decades later.
In Detroit, there were some places you could get out to when you were 18, or there were other ways to get into places. And I mean, fashion wise, you did see, you know, some of this with some of the people who would go out, and there were big clubs in Detroit at the time that would have looked like this. So it's possible Pittsburgh had a scene, but I've never thought of Pittsburgh as having like a big underground music scene. Detroit had techno, which is why it, you know, and obviously like the punk scene and rock scene before that, but I don't think of Pittsburgh and think of people who are fashionably dressed in the 90s, like in this type of environment. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that does exist. I never really spent much time in Pittsburgh other than driving through.
Because like I thought, like when I'm watching this, I'm like, is this New York? Do I recognize that looks like a loft in Soho, you know, where I walk, you know, on, you know, other days, and then it's like Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, is there some sort of deep-seated Catholic connection at Pittsburgh? Was there a bunch of stigmatas in Pittsburgh? Like, what's the reason?
There are a lot of Catholics in Pittsburgh. It was actually a big center for the Catholic workers movement in the 1930s. A lot of the sort of social activist priests who worked with, you know, because you've got the steel workers there, for example. Pittsburgh famously known for like its steelworks and things like that. So there were priests there who were very active in the workers' movement, and you know, they faced opposition from people like Fulton Sheen, who I'm sure you know who Fulton Sheen is, right?
I'm going to be completely honest with you, I don't.
Okay, well, he was a big TV priest in the 1930s. Well, not the 30s. In the 30s, in the 30s, he was a radio priest, but he eventually went to TV in like the 50s and 60s. And he's one of these guys people are trying to get canonized just because he was so popular and really big on using media to spread the faith, which I understand, but he also was very opposed to the Catholic workers movement and workers' rights. He also was anti-fascist, so he's a complicated dude.
Lots going on.
Yeah,
there.
He took on the radio priest, who was a fascist Catholic priest from the Detroit area, and then he was also against the Catholic workers movement. So, you know, I mean, this is typical of Catholics. Nobody agrees with each other.
Right, absolutely.
So,
I mean, but our priest isn't exactly a Pittsburgh priest either. He's Roman, right? Isn't he from Italy?
Well, he's working in Rome. I don't think. Do we ever establish where he's actually from?
I feel like they ask.
Are we referring to
Gabriel Byrne?
The one and only Gabriel Byrne?
Yes.
Andrew Kiernan.
Yes.
Who's got that smoldering Damien Karras quality going on?
That's the one.
He's got a Karras quality for sure. That's why he's in Hot Priest Summer.
Hot Priest Summer.
And who is ironically, even though he's not technically Satan, if you remember the other like bookend film that goes with this as well is End of Days.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yes.
As a cop.
Yep. Where
and Kevin Pollak as his, and Gabriel Byrne is essentially supposed to be Satan. And this is another film that has that same aesthetic of that like dark, gothic, grunge, alternative world that does not exist anywhere else other than in the 90s until like the alternative music scene gets killed when Creed and Nickelback become the final, that
final
becomes
boss
the
of alternative
music
boss of
standard.
alt rock.
We start
Yeah.
in the early 90s with, The Cure finally breaking through with Wish and My Bloody Valentines, with, Loveless and all those records, and Ministry with, Psalm 69. And we end with Nickelback and Creed.
I'm going to say,
there's your decade.
I don't know the exact film that would be the demarcation point, but I do think that it's got to be somewhere where soundtracks shifted to, like, remember how movies started having just like emo and pop punk covers of classic songs, and then at the same time you also had other soundtracks that were it was shifting more electronic, right? With like The Matrix, you start getting more electronic accent, and then by like the early 2000s, the US, at least in film and cinema, you're starting to get these like really a ton of films with electronic soundtracks, not just alternative electronic, but like
that became the next big thing, was when you had, what was it,
Right.
the Spawn soundtrack that had like the heavy metal guys with,
the Orbital with
Method,
Metallica,
Orbital. Yeah, exactly. And I was music director back in those days at WCRX in Chicago at that time. So I was getting a copy of all those records and like just spinning them on the air. And it's like, oh, this is cool. What are we doing? It's like interesting. Metallica and Orbital.
Where are we
Why
going
not?
with
That was
this,
a great,
right?
Electronic music in the late 90s was peak for me.
Oh yeah.
The melting pot of ideas and music, where it was like the genres didn't even really matter because everything was it was just happening all at once. And like, you really couldn't be a micro genre person. You had to be kind of like embracing all of it at the time, because there weren't enough of these niches to like go off into. You had to kind of all work. That's why raves, you'd have like a chill out room where you'd have ambient music in one room, and you'd have house in another room and drum and bass in another. You couldn't divide people that way, the way you do now, where you're like, we're doing an all techno night. That didn't happen that way that much back then. There was always.
So here's a
crossover.
funny rave story for you from the mid 90s. I think it was 1994 in a warehouse in Chicago. Is a bunch of, this is probably like around like where what is now the Fulton Market District, where all the fancy restaurants are over there on Randolph and Lake,
as it goes.
And I'm in some warehouse, and there's a bunch of like kids walking around with just giant nitrous oxide balloons in the so-called chill out room and whatever. And I think I was telling them that I was Julius Caesar and that I was already dead. And
I love it. Well,
and it was really messing with their minds.
The nitrous scene in Chicago is still alive
that
and
they
well.
were like,
tell you what.
"Who are you?" I said, "I'm Caesar. I did not heed the Ides of March."
I'm not somebody who partakes, but it's not a party in Chicago unless somebody rolls up with a tank at some point.
I was just at the Fish Show this past Sunday, and you roll right in front of the United Center, and there is just hundreds of balloons as far as the eye can see, just nitrous, just people walking all the way right up and down.
Just
cops
out
are
in the
there.
open. Yeah.
Oh yeah, cops are there. Guys with the nitrous tanks right over there. Just
Everybody's got a guy who works at like a dentist office or something, or a supplier, and they just like, that's their deal on the weekend. They're the tank guy.
Yeah, you can get 2 balloons and 2 beers for $20.
So yeah, this lands at this really interesting time for soundtracks. It's the golden age of the soundtrack, I think. Not in terms of like the film score, but in terms of like the needle drops. If you were into music in the 90s, you were like up on the latest film soundtracks.
Right.
And they were iconic. Hackers, Pi, the Crow soundtrack, Spawn, The Matrix, Train Spotting. There's more obscure ones too. Like his second film, A Life Less Ordinary, is a great soundtrack that nobody really talks about. I actually DJ'd for Danny Boyle at the Train Spotting 2 premiere a few years ago. Wow. And they asked me to play a bunch of stuff from his films, and me being a big music dork, I pulled the CD. I went on Amazon and got the CD of A Life Less Ordinary, because I was like, I have to do this if I'm playing for Danny and Irving Welsh. So I rip all of it. I'm playing. People would come up to me and just kind of eyeball me like, I know what you're doing. And I'm like, yeah, thank you.
I guess I have to go back and listen to 28 Days Later soundtrack and be like, how was that? Because that was Danny Boyle.
Danny Boyle, great soundtracks all around. So recommend. This film feels so 1999, like the fashion, the people who are in it, the way, the color grading, the fact that it's still shot on film, the amount of just crazy dissolves and cuts that don't always make sense. We're like peak MTV editing in this movie.
Oh yeah.
Which was like a big criticism at the time of movies. I don't know how much you remember this, Kevin. You probably do, Chris. That there was a big pushback against the music video directors who were coming in, like Spike Jonze, Darren Aronofsky, David Fincher. There was kind of a criticism of them bringing too much of the
absolutely
the music video style.
It was that the close editing cuts where you can't see anything because the film camera is so close, where you cannot see what's actually happening in the action of the film. And I think one of the greatest examples of this is some of the fight scenes in some of the Batman sequels after Batman Returns.
Oh yeah,
is like you want the camera to be pulled back a little bit so you could actually see like a body actually kicking somebody. Instead, you see a foot, you see a face, you see a jaw.
Yep.
And it's got like those close cuts, those close edits. You're like, oh, this is annoying me. I hate when film is like this. It was, because you wanted something a little more realistic, not as flashy. But that was kind of that craze. And I think another thing that adds to that whole like zeitgeist of this era is that in 1999, you actually had people believing that the world was going to end.
Y2K,
you had the whole
baby.
Y2K scare. And what's going to happen? And we don't really have this feeling again until the Mayan calendar in 2012, when we had our whole other slew of disaster films, courtesy of Roland Emmerich.
Yeah, I remember this time. I remember I wanted to go see Metallica at the Silverdome in Detroit for New Year's Eve Y2K. Ted Nugent was opening, but that's not important.
That's not important.
Very much not important.
Well, it's Detroit. It makes sense.
Yeah, I guess,
they were
right.
like,
if you know Detroit, right?
Yeah, it and you can see how Metallica at the time, Ted Nugent, he was a loudmouth asshole at the time, but he wasn't like on, Fox News every other week at that time.
Right.
So there was still some love for him from like guitar guys who he was a hero to. It makes sense. But yeah, we were going to go to the Silverdome. My buddies all went. I was not allowed to go. I had to stay home because my parents were worried that we would lose power and that there would be chaos at the Silverdome and people would get hurt. Which, to be fair, like if the power did go out at the Silverdome, I wouldn't be so much worried about the world ending, but I could see people getting trampled in the panic. You know what I mean? We've all heard these stories of like tragedies at music venues. So I think their concern wasn't like completely unheard of, but it was kind of disappointing overnight being like, Russia lost power. We might lose power. Nope, we didn't lose power. Never mind. Yeah. It was the biggest letdown since Geraldo opened Al Capone's vault, honestly. So,
yeah, my only memory, I guess, is being in like elementary school and a bunch of computers and teachers basically like, well, the computers might not work next time you come in. Like, okay, because all the adults are talking about the banks and whether or not they're going to lose all their money, and us as kids are like, well, what Y2K? All right.
Sure. I didn't understand it at the time. I was just like, okay, so you guys didn't think there'd be a year after 2000?
Right.
That seems like poor planning, but
it's all about the zeros, man.
It's all about the zeros. Like you said, this is a pre-millennial panic. This is pre 9/11. I do love watching a pre 9/11 film. It really is like a different time, which is weird to think about how much that changed our world. I didn't even think about this. There aren't any cell phones in this.
No,
right?
They pick up the rotary phones and they call them across the whole time.
Okay. So yeah, we're talking like no cell phones in sight, which lends itself to the fact that this is about a very ancient institution, which is slow to evolve and slow to get with the times. So it's a perfect way to kind of portray the Catholic Church. And I think on that note, it's a good time to kind of just let's lean into what this film is about. Patricia Arquette is a hairdresser who lives in Pittsburgh, of all places. Even though they mostly shot in the Pittsburgh stuff in LA, there is some Pittsburgh exterior work, but most of the shooting was done in LA. She begins to receive the wounds. We don't initially know what they are.
Right. Yep.
Meanwhile, there is a priest who is kind of the guy hired by the Vatican to investigate the cause of sainthood. And he's investigating a priest who had recently died. There was a bleeding statue of the Virgin Mary bleeding from the eyes. Yeah. And he packs up the statue and brings it back to the Vatican.
Or it seems more specifically, he's hired to disprove a lot of these things, because it feels like his lack of faith is because he keeps getting sent around to make sure that these miracles aren't real, as opposed to finding good things in the world.
Right. Well, and it's good to have a skeptic priest. It's good to have a priest saying like,
former scientist priest in this circumstance.
It's interesting because this event, this miracle, quote, miracle is happening, and it's going to tie back later into the plot. Was he a monk or was he like a father? Okay. Yeah. He died, and then this Virgin Mary statue started crying. I always love these miracles of the Virgin Mary statue crying that happen, or like when she cries tears or tears of blood. And I'm always just like, has anyone checked for a leak in the building?
Right.
Because there was one in Wisconsin a few years ago.
I think I remember hearing about it.
Yeah, and I wanted to go investigate it because it wasn't too far. I could have gone. Really wish I had, because I've only been to a few quote miracle sites, and there were always ones that like didn't get picked up by the Vatican. Right. They were always like fake ones. It's always like they're explaining what's happening, and I'm like, it's like, oh, the walls behind this mural of the Virgin are crying, and I'm like, is the plumbing bad?
Right.
Like, and it's like nobody even bothered to check the fucking plumbing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I thought the writing was really interesting in this, how they, in the same sentences he's describing this actual miracle, he's also asked about the stain on the wall that he was originally sent to Brazil to investigate. And he's basically, and he says exactly that. It's a water drain, or it's a stain. So he's making a commentary that oftentimes these are just exactly what you said, just complete circumstances.
Yeah.
Well, this is what this pops up like under, the underpass at, Irving Park and Pulaski,
yep.
I-90, 94,
Yeah, so this
Lady
was
Guadalupe.
There was a stain under a lime stain under the freeway, and somebody said they saw the Virgin Mary in it, and suddenly it was like a site of devotion. Every time you drove by, there were flowers, like candles lit, people praying, a line to see this thing for like years. I mean, it didn't go away, and you hear about this stuff, but to see it, and to see that it's literally just a stain that obviously is a leak from the freeway onto the underpass, and people are like venerating this limestone stain, it really makes you like rethink all that stuff you were raised to believe in, that they tell you is real.
Especially if you're at a younger age too, and you still have a whole lot of like open-eyed, like healthy skepticism ahead of you. You're like, this just feels like a carnival ride or carnival trick. Like, just come and see the horned yak lady or something like that,
Well, it's funny because like I was really interested in magic as a kid, and magicians really helped me to actually with leaving the church, because so many magicians are atheists, and they point out so many of the techniques used by, especially like faith healers and stuff, are all magic tricks. They're all things that are used by magicians. Mm-hmm. And when you start thinking about that, you start thinking about things like, there's like this guy there's this priest, I think down in Brazil, I believe, who takes flower petals and he puts them in a book, and they get pressed into like an image of the Virgin Mary or like a cross or something. And people are like, oh, he's the miraculous petals of Father so-and-so. And it's like, guys, this isn't that hard to understand how he's doing this. You don't see this happening at like St. Patrick's in New York, or like Holy Name Cathedral in Chicago. It's always like some random town in Argentina, right? Or like, some
Brazil, middle of Brazil, like in the film,
right? Or with Protestants, it's out in like the middle of like, the Plain State somewhere in some rural town. You start to wonder, like, is there a correlation between access to education? I don't want to say people are dumb. I'm saying like, when you don't have access to education, it's hard to develop your critical thinking skills. I mean, we're privileged to have the backgrounds we do, right? But I do wonder about that sometimes. And what sucks is like, these people aren't being done any favors by being told like, oh, you're right, this is a miracle.
So much about religion is all family-based, right? All of these individuals coming to the same place, having the same beliefs, and so they talk in the same groups. So all of these these national groups, all these people of the same backgrounds where they're moving from, are now very likely in these same religious backgrounds. So now they're sharing all of these kind of these stories and these experiences, and if they're all kind of in that same family umbrella, as they say, that continues just to expand out and expand out. So why does someone go to a venerated place for a year and a half to 2 years? Because it's constantly in conversation. It's constantly a wrong among the community. And hey, did you hear so and so? Oh yeah, their trick knee fixed after blessing, kissing the venerated mother or whatever it is. Like it's all. It's not hearsay, I guess, so much as it is just like water cooler talk, even when you're talking about religion.
And so, unrelated to this, obviously, Chris, we go from here to Frankie Page. And what's her deal? Has no connection to the Catholic Church.
Deal,
what's her deal, man?
Yeah. she just cuts hair, and basically she has her mother is in Brazil. And she just happens to buy a rosary.
Stolen from the coffin, I believe, of Alameda.
Stolen from the coffin, which is like
child.
foreshadowing, like something bad's going to happen. And I went to RogerEbert.com because I wanted to see what Roger Ebert had to say about this film.
Yes.
And he gave it 2 stars out of 4, which Ebert's, that was always his, like, it's fair, it's not horrible, but there's just too much going on that makes no sense. And my popcorn wasn't tasty enough, so this movie's getting 2 stars. You throw in this like exorcism motif,
Right.
Which
that is
it's going to possess her.
Yeah, which that
like
kind of throws
cursed
me off.
object, like in an episode of Friday the 13th, the series.
That's where it lost me almost immediately.
The movie very much like it's a pastiche of Catholic superstition and ideas, which it's another one of those films I've talked about this where sometimes with movies like this, I watched this in a room full of Protestants in college, people from like the campus ministry that was like more Lutheran, well, I believe, and they all look at me halfway through and they're just like, so what's this? And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like,
why are you looking at me, man?
Why are you looking at me? And half the time it's like, I don't know, because it's like convoluted, sort of outsider understanding of our ideas and the sacraments, or like our superstitions or our history, which this one with the Gnostic Gospels is confusing too, because it's, we talked about this, you and I, before you came in, Chris, about the Gnostic Gospels and how this movie, at the end, you find out that like basically everything's tied back to the new discovery of the Gnostic Gospels. But as a Catholic who knew what was going on, I was like, wait, they just discovered these? These were discovered in 1945. Why is it a plot point in the movie? That threw me off pretty bad.
It took them some time to make it in a movie. You know,
I guess, yeah.
It's using, like, the MCU is using comics from the 80s and the 90s to make these movies, and people are like, oh my God, this is amazing. It's like, didn't you read the Infinity War? Didn't you read this has already been written 30 years prior. So it's funny you mentioned that, the whole Protestant thing, because like my father's Roman Catholic, my mother was Episcopalian, and myself and my sister, we kind of got like the whole, went to the Episcopal Church more than the Catholic Church. We did that with my father on occasion, and it was just, so like, they always say about the Episcopalians, it's like, Catholicism light. It's, all the ceremony, all the pomp and circumstance, but half the guilt.
Yep. Without the homophobia and transphobia.
It's the film too. It just harkens back to The Exorcist. There's tropes from The Exorcist. You get even lines like, I think I'm losing my faith. I've lost my faith. His friend, and it's like, I'm sure that Jason Miller said the exact same thing to somebody else, and then you have Jonathan Pryce and Veronica Mars's dad, at the end, when there's like they put on their Max von Sydow robes and they're like almost ready to yell, "The power of Christ compels you."
Yeah. That's so wild when that happens, because there's like no reason for it. I'm like, wait, why are we exorcising her now? That was never established. Also, priests wouldn't go straight to exorcism like that ever. Like,
I just assumed they were there to kill her.
But. Yeah, I know. But if you're like, like in The Exorcist, there's a whole process.
He starts choking her. He's like, "You will not kill my church," or something like that.
But I absolutely agree with the exorcism motifs. There was so many of that, as far as just like even Gabriel Byrne just showing up, like the way the traveling priest showing up to take care of someone in a different town, just like the vibe of the whole thing. Yeah, very felt Exorcist. Yeah,
and Frankie receives the first wounds of the stigmata pretty early in the movie. Something I find interesting about this is, so she receives them in the wrists in the movie, because according to the movie, and I did a little bit of diving on this, but according to modern scholars, a lot of historians seem to think that either A, people were actually crucified through the wrists, or B, they were through the hands, because a lot of medieval art does depict it through the hands. But the way they would do it is tie the wrists so that, and then the hand was essentially just to make sure it didn't flop around.
What I remember from basically like studying like Roman civilization is that the Roman crucifixions was through the wrist, because if they did it through the hands would rip right off the wood. And that was the reason. But I think maybe like the artist took the idea that like, through the hands, it looks more poetic, it looks more artistic, as opposed to, but then there's other paintings that showcase this. where it is through the wrist.
Here's
But
my 2 cents on this. I remember the imagery of Golgotha or Calvary always having the two thieves that were crucified next to Jesus with the ropes on the arms, like very traditionally, like you saw that. So my guess is that's probably the way they traditionally would do, just maybe criminals, and then for better words, the romanticism of the crucifixion, because it's gotten to that point after all of the art and everything through modern time. It looks more aesthetically pleasing. He's more in a blessing mode where he's got the hands in a spot and his feet almost look like he's in a peaceful spot. I mean, we know that religion changes the way that art involves. Exactly. So we have no idea. I mean, we look at what is the most popular picture of Jesus that everybody sees? He's, he looks like an Aryan, and we know that Jesus wasn't that. So there's lots of that.
I was at the British Museum a few years ago, and I saw they had fairly recently, and by recently I mean like probably a decade or two ago, found the earliest surviving mosaic of Jesus. I think period in England, because the Roman Empire obviously had spread to England. And he just looks kind of like a schlubby guy. Like, he doesn't look anything like the Jesus not the long hair, short hair, but it feels like it's very much the Romans taking their style and using that to depict Jesus, because that's how everybody does it. Yeah, look at The Chosen. That guy looks like he's from now.
I always think about the Shroud of Turin as like the face that makes people think about Jesus, right? The shroud that he died on, and that's the picture that people kind of have taken and evolved into the modern day version of Jesus. But
I mean, it's fake, but
yeah, exactly. Come on, look at that picture. Like, how could you even pull that? It's awful. Anyway,
yeah, but it's been extensively studied by scientists who were Catholic and hired by the Vatican. Come on,
by the Vatican.
They can't possibly be biased, Kevin.
Of course not. Why would they be?
Right? They have no motive to be biased and say that it is a legit the shroud that covered Jesus.
Yeah. Oh.
Anyway, yeah, but I find it interesting, though, because if Jesus was crucified in the wrists, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but I've just noticed that a lot of the stigmatics who are very famous stigmatics get the nails in the palms. Like Padre Pio had it in the palms. St. Francis of Assisi had his wounds in the palms, which raises the question, either A, Jesus did get crucified under the palms, or those guys are full of shit and making it up. But we'll get to that.
Yep. I mean, what other options are there, really, I suppose?
There aren't many options. So, yeah, Frankie ends up in the hospital with these wounds. Doctors are baffled. Her heart stops during treatment. The wounds heal quickly and then reopen.
That screaming scene. It was just ridiculous.
I love when the doctor touches it and it starts bleeding profusely again. And she is like, maybe we shouldn't touch it.
Right, yeah, just hold on.
Maybe don't do that.
It was just like, all right. I felt for her, like, yeah, it was kind of wild.
Chris, was the second incident with the wounds is on the train, correct?
It's the train, and that's the part where I'm like, Pittsburgh has a subway?
Yeah, right.
Because it looks like, in that scene, like it's late night, or it's like 34th Herald Square just outside on the F train, and she gets lashed up. And everyone's there to see. But if I guess if it was New York, nobody paid any attention to it. They just be like, okay,
guys,
this is going to make you a little late for work today. But
we're looking for realism from the director of Blank Check.
You got the strobe light going on. You got the darkness. Yep. It all of a sudden it comes like Midnight Meat Train, out of a Clive Barker short story on the subway. But it makes some great atmosphere. For that moment of, and then there's also similarities I think of, because it's Patricia Arquette. That's like these dream sequence Freddy Krueger moments from Dream Warriors.
Yes.
Or something where she's being thrashed around. She gets possessed. She's throwing Gabriel Byrne around like she's Freddy Krueger, towards the end of the film, when she's possessed by Father Alameda, who's, I think the inspiration was Padre Pio for that. And then she goes to the club, and you have the Crown of Thorns,
right?
Which tequila shots and the Crown of Thorns for the King of Kings.
I guess a lot of stigmatics not only display the main wounds we think of the crucifixion, which is the hands, the feet, the side from where he was pierced with the sword, but also some do exhibit the crown of thorns. The subway is the lashes, obviously from the Romans whipping him. Other things I've heard of are there was a stigmatic in the mid 20th century, and she supposedly had a mark on her shoulder, which was like a constant bruising that was supposed to mimic where he carried
the weight of the cross.
The weight of the cross.
The weight of the cross. Okay.
So
interesting.
It's a lot of effort to put into self-harm if it is real.
Right.
Sorry.
A lot of documentation.
I'm not a believer in the stigmata, if anybody can tell. I've read too much about it. But who knows? Maybe I'll be wrong, and then I'll be like Father Gabriel Byrne in this movie.
Yeah, you can find your long-lost love after trying to save her from an extra... Never mind. You get the point.
That's a lot of work.
A lot.
There's a priest on the subway at the same time. There's a lot of religious people on this. A lot of Catholics on this subway. A lot of nuns, priests.
Yeah, I think the convenience of that priest took me out of that scene a little bit too much. Like, you could tell that he was only conveniently placed on there to give some validity to seeing the stigmata of having a witness and furthering the plot. Like,
there is a lot of that in this movie, which it's dumb, but also it kind of makes the movie a fun ride. I was watching this going, this is a silly movie, and I'm enjoying myself.
It's a popcorn flick.
That was my thing.
It's absolutely a popcorn flick.
This is a very enjoyable, silly movie. Father Durning somehow gets video from the train. I was wondering, like...
The CTV. They pulled it from the
security.
But
how does a priest...
It was a CCTV.
But there wasn't a crime, so like, if you're a priest, can you go...
That's a good point, right?
If I'm in Chicago, and I'm a priest, and I see someone get the stigmata... Do I go to like CTA, the guy in the vest at the terminal, and I go, "Hey, I just saw somebody get the stigmata. Can I look at your CCD, TV tape? Like, can I take a gander at that?" They're not going to let you do that.
And then a direct line to the top of the Vatican, the right guy who needs to be investigating all things related to stigmatas.
I'll say this to be fair, you could pull that off now because you can call Pope Leo.
Oh yeah, right.
And be like, "Hey, I got to get the tape from 35th Street." Red line there?
Yeah, the bear guy down there. He's got it waiting for me.
Going to need to get that tape from the CTA there, okay?
Although I'm going to start switching my Uper accent here.
I know, that's my problem. Is I'm in Wisconsin. I've lived in the UPN, Chicago. It's like this weird sliding scale. You can kind of slip into both.
You just got to say Ditka every once in a while. It gets you right back into Chicago.
Bears.
Bears.
So Father Durning gets the tape, takes it to Jonathan Pryce, and is like, "Hey, I think we have something going on here." And they eventually send Kiernan to investigate, who at this point she's heard the name Kiernan. So he goes to investigate by going to her hairdresser shop to get a haircut. And this is the most hot priest summer scene in the movie.
Yeah.
Gabriel Byrne walks in. Keep in mind, at this point, he's already been hit on by sex workers in Rome. And I think Brazil as well. It feels like he's getting hit on a lot in this movie. And he walks in the hair salon. Everybody stops and looks at him. Patricia Arquette's like, "Hey there."
Yeah, like, what are you doing?
And they have a meet cute. She has a meet cute with Gabriel Byrne, the priest, who comes into her hair salon. But she quickly realizes when he mentions his name that, oh no, this is the priest that I've heard this name. What is this about?
Is the lore that you're supposed to remember being possessed, the things that you do when you're possessed? Like, it feels like she knew his name only because of the spirit of the padre that was possessing her. Right? But then she was able to recognize that name, like, oh yeah, I think I need to know you.
Even though you forget what is going on when you're possessed.
Absolutely. You don't remember writing anything. You don't remember. She's like, well, this is my handwriting. I don't remember, but you remember that you need to know this guy's name.
For those just tuning in, she's been writing in a strange language she doesn't recognize at this point from the stigmata when she's in a trance. And we'll eventually find out this is a form of Aramaic spoken and written during the time of Jesus. So that's what she's doing when she's possessed by this guy or demon. We don't know at this point who she's possessed by. And of course, she gets the crown of thorns in the nightclub. We've talked about that. This nightclub, pretty freaking awesome. I doubt this exists in Pittsburgh, but again, we did have big nightclubs like this in Detroit in the late 90s because people were still going out and spending money.
Yeah, we had them in Chicago too.
Yeah, well, Chicago's it's a bigger city than Detroit, so like Chicago, not surprising because you had Limelight.
We had Crowbar, we had Shelter, There was, of course, Neo, but Neo compared to like Crowbar and Shelter is small. And then you had like all these other like then you had Dome Room, you had, Excalibur, something on that quality of like stage wise, like similar to, what the Limelight was in New York.
Wasn't Excalibur like a Limelight location in Chicago originally?
I think it was, yeah.
Okay.
And then they changed the name.
So
yeah,
I guess
it became known as Excalibur.
Okay.
And then Dome Room was next door, and Excalibur had all your mainstream dance music, and then Dome Room had the more underground stuff.
So if anybody is from Pittsburgh and knows if you had mega clubs that look like the ones in this movie, drop us a line. Let us know. We have no idea.
Let us know. Yeah.
Now, obviously, not obviously, but from a perspective of why do they exist, right? Why do these clubs exist? I feel like they really were just hammering the idea that our main character is so not a normal stigmatic, right? That she's parties in clubs. Right, she's an atheist. She's a hairdresser who's around tattoo people. They really want to make it go out of the way to make this is an alt chick who likes doing tequila shots. How could she be getting the stigmata? And so it's interesting to me that they gravitate towards this club scene as being the most anti-religious form of thing that they could possibly put as a juxtaposition. I thought it was really interesting.
I mean, there's that idea of like, I mean, it's funny because like Hollywood, you think of as being very, people always accuse Hollywood of being like this den of sin and so like sinful and everything, but they're very puritanical in their views a lot of times in their filmmaking. Even when they're depicting stuff like this, it's like their views are still very puritanical compared to more progressive actual cultures like this that you would be in, right? So they're saying, oh, alcohol, that's the devil.
Oh, mercy. Like Hays Code ends 1962 roughly, and
60,
so we're talking about a
64,
movie
65.
that's a little over 30 years past the Hays Code.
Yeah.
So that demonization of that puritanical, repressive Victorian aesthetic, it still exists. I mean, I even will point it out to some of my students. You're like this because of this, this Judeo-Christian thing. This is why you're feeling, you shouldn't be watching this right now. I remember, with my 10th graders, like a year or two ago, when we're watching Bram Stoker Dracula, and there's some scenes of nudity, and it's mostly international students. This doesn't faze them one bit.
No.
But like myself and my co-teacher, we're like, oh boy, we're going to get in trouble for showing this. They're, if somebody sees this, they're going to, and we're like, no, this is us. This is our Judeo-Christian, Victorian puritanical belief system that is why we feel this like shame element. And that's why, if you think about it too, that the way it's shot, she's in the bathtub when she's, she gets the first wounds.
Yep.
But by this point, Patricia Arquette's she's a kind of an A-list Hollywood actress at this point. She's done Lost Highways, so she's got more credit. She's got more notability. So she has more power to say what she wants to do and what she won't do on screen. And also, just if you think about it too, is that and this has always been a trend that I've noticed, is that Hollywood hasn't made movies for adults in decades. Everything's PG-13.
Right. We
can't have adult themes. We can't have realistic, relationships with characters, doing, certain things that were acceptable in, the 70s. And we had that, resurgence in the indie boom of the early 90s, like the independent cinema.
Oh, yeah.
And then when Hollywood big shots said, hey, we're going to be independent cinema too, but we're going to make all these changes,
Yeah.
It just, it's just, everything almost becomes asexual in a sense,
Yeah.
It's, it's just a way that, Hollywood makes movies.
But
this
weird,
one still has kind of that.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, it's weird. I feel like so many R-rated movies today being made out of Hollywood they have less sexual tension in them than a PG movie from the 80s.
Oh yeah.
If you watch Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark has more sexual energy in it than throw a rock and hit any R-rated movie coming out today.
Yeah.
And that movie's horny. Like it's not even that's like showing stuff. It's that the movie is horny, you know? And that's what I've noticed with a lot of stuff from the 80s is like, man, these movies, this PG rated family film is really horny.
Well, yeah, and then the way that ratings scales slides and changes throughout the years too, as things become harder and harder to get certain ratings or and all that jazz.
70s PG movies have boobs in them.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Yeah,
it's totally NC-17 X ratings, like things like that.
So we're contemplating doing a run of X-rated films next year or later this year, and I was looking into it, and I realized like very few films got an X rating for violence. It's almost always for adult themes or nudity. It's never for violence. It could be torture porn, and like half the time they don't get it. You know.
Was it the number of
Clockwork
F-bombs
Orange might be one that actually has violence that was connected with that, but that's also sexual in nature too.
Right.
But try to find one with just violence, like none of the sex, just violence. It's harder. It's harder to find one that's rated X that's mainly got violence.
That's American.
Yeah. No, I'm just making a point about our culture.
Yeah. No, right. The movies that made us, right?
Yeah, right.
This country was founded on explosions and revolt. You know, we're going to shoot those guys in red coats that are, we're going to stand in the woods. They're going to stand on an open field. We have our Native American, scouts that help us, and we're just going to shoot them from the side, but that's again, another tale for another time.
And the Puritans, who were people who literally spied on their neighbors to make sure they weren't doing anything sexual. So, and
would send them to the stake and call them witches to get land, to get whatever they wanted because they were against them or they were in their way.
Oh yeah. Like I said, you still see some of that Puritanism in this depiction of the nightclubs, even in this depiction of Frankie, the character. It's like, she's she's a regular person. Like she's somebody you could hang out with. She's not doing anything really that permissive at all. She's not sleeping with anybody in the movie. She's not really doing any hard drugs or anything or getting that crazy. The stuff that she's doing that is in any way like out of her mind is being possessed by a monk, and that's not her fault.
Right.
But she's not doing anything to indicate that she lives a sort of like hedonistic lifestyle. She goes out for a few beers with friends to listen to music. She cuts hair. Yeah. That's the weird part about this movie is I'm like, you're not really convincing me that she's like a sinner.
No, I think the biggest thing is that they just the outright you're an atheist, and the way that Andrew Kiernan basically was like dismissed after the first 30 seconds of finding out that she doesn't believe in God.
Right.
That's the crux of it. All these other things can convince you that she's a godless person, but it's I don't believe in God. And how could possibly an atheist have a stigmata, and all of the things that happen with that?
Yeah, no, but it's just funny though that they're obviously trying to paint her not just as an atheist, but as like a sinful person.
Yeah.
With puritanical symbols, essentially, like things that aren't really that bad. That they're trying to be like, look, she's bad, and I'm like, she just seems like a normal adult in her like early 30s, maybe. This escalates pretty quickly to the scene where she's in the alley where she is carving what looks like Aramaic into a car with a glass bottle. This is a gnarly scene. This is such a weird scene. Like
we were talking about music earlier. Like this scene for me was when I really was taking my notes on the music. I was like, this sounds Doom Eternal, like the soundtrack for all the Doom video games thrown in with some just ridiculous over the top heavy metal music and the shattering glass. And I'm like, this is the aesthetic right here. That was probably my favorite scene in the film, to be honest with you, from just like a pure chaos and truly her being completely now possessed by that entity. Just a great scene.
Yeah, it's a really cool scene. A lot of Dutch angles. Nothing makes me more nervous than the ladder of an fire escape coming down randomly, because I just always assume I'm like, I see those fire escapes. I've never had to actually use one, but like I'm always just like, man, what happens if I go to like pull on it and the thing falls on my head? Like that's like a Final Destination kill waiting to happen.
Right. Or I'm coming down from the top and I go to put my foot on it and the whole thing just drops out.
No, absolutely not. It's just, and so, Kiernan at this point is just like, okay, I guess I believe this is legit. She's not making this up, because he was kind of doubtful that this was actually happening to her. And so he's pretty much all in now. They photograph her apartment and all the messages that she's written, and he sends them back to Rome, where Brother Delmonico recognizes them as fragments of a hidden gospel, and then he deletes the images before sharing them with the higher church officials, right?
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
Well, he doesn't. No, he doesn't end up sharing them at all. He gets caught.
I'm sorry, he gets caught.
Yeah,
My
gets
bad.
caught.
My bad.
Yeah.
Thank you. I try to keep all my notes straight here. And basically, it's like this is essentially they're referencing the Gnostic Gospels found in the Nag Hammadi library, which was discovered in 1945. This movie is kind of taking some artistic license to paint them as being something that's like secret and being like suppressed by the church, and is like a new discovery that could like unravel the entire Catholic Church. Whereas in reality, the Catholic Church was just like, oh, it's all heresies. That's not part of the canon.
It's all it took them for them to say. Quite literally, all they had to do was denounce it as heresy,
Yeah, it's
and
heresy.
that was the end of it. And
Yeah.
for whatever reason, whether it's the writing team, whether we feel like Rupert himself, Rupert Wainwright, was like, I have an axe to grind with the Catholic Church, or if it was Tom Lazarus because he was the screenwriter, like someone had an opinion one way or another about the way the Catholic Church is currently moving, and maybe they are, I won't say conspiracy theorist, but they have a certain opinion on the Gospel of Thomas, right? And those discoveries from 1945.
And I feel like there were a lot of books on, because those were discovered in 45, in the counterculture of the 1960s and 70s, there were a lot of people passing around copies of the writings on the Gnostic Gospels. There were a lot of books being published about the Gnostic Gospels, about some of the, the other Christianities that were around before Roman Catholicism essentially consolidated everything. Now, and people, one struggle is a lot of people often paint this as like a conspiracy, like, oh, the church is covering it up. And it's like, it seems pretty clear that the church's canon was pretty well solidified before the Roman Empire, before Roman Catholicism kind of became the main church outside of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Like, the canon was pretty well formulated by then, Chris.
Are we talking about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John?
Well, not just that, but like the entire canon of like what would become the Bible, essentially. Like
Okay.
What books are in the Bible versus which ones are not.
Okay.
Like
So
what-
yeah, because like you got your Exodus books in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
You've got your, just kind of that old like fire and brimstone stuff, in the Old Testament. I think was it Robin Williams or was it George I think it was Robin Williams, or it was one of the comedians. He said in the Old
One of them.
Testament, God's a prick. God's a prick. But then like in the New Testament, he introduces this new guy, Jesus. Jesus is a nice guy, and Jesus wants to be your friend. And God's apologizing for being such a prick that he wants to make things better for you.
Yeah, it's called the New Covenant is what we call it in Catholicism. The idea that Jesus comes to kind of create a new covenant, an extension, if you will, of the old covenant, which says basically now, rather than if you've done some things that are bad, and hell was not a concept that existed the way we think of it at all before then. It was just kind of like you just go into a state of darkness or nothingness. But the idea was that through Jesus Christ, your sins can be forgiven. So his sacrifice allows the sins to be forgiven. This is like new stuff. It's not Old Testament thinking. Jewish tradition before this was very different. Now, I personally think Catholics unfairly depict how Judaism actually interprets this. I think and part of that is wrapped up in the centuries of anti-Semitism in the Catholic Church and misinterpretation of Jewish scholarship and Jewish interpretation of their own scriptures. But essentially, yeah, the New Covenant basically says like, hey, you can be forgiven through Jesus Christ. And it kind of creates this kinder, gentler religion. You don't have to do animal sacrifice anymore is a big part of it. Although on that point, people had kind of stopped doing that anyway around the time Jesus comes around. He's just like, I'm going to run on this one. But, there's a lot of that going on. The other thing to understand about the canon, I think you and I were talking about this, is the Gospels, there's a missing source there's a theorized missing source to the Gospels, right? So you have what are called the Synoptic Gospels. Now that's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John is its own thing because John really liked hallucinating and just His writing is very different. John might have been getting into some interesting plant life from what I can tell.
Yep, I think you're probably right about that.
It might be I'm making this up right now, but it sure seems like it, having read his stuff. But Matthew and Luke are comprised of a lot of information from Mark. So Mark is hypothesized at least to have come first. And then Matthew and Luke were pulling from Mark, but there's also a theorized source called the Q source. And the Q source is theorized to be a missing document of sayings of Jesus Christ. And the idea is that the Q source was being pulled from by Matthew and Luke to fill in the gaps in their gospels. And then there's like other material in there called the M source and the L source, which is that's information Matthew or Luke had about Jesus, or might have fabricated, who knows. But the Q source is kind of this mysterious thing, because how would Matthew and Luke have access to the same information if there wasn't either a written source or it's oral history that had been preserved? Because, before people start writing stuff down, even then, most information is passed down orally. Genesis is created from oral sources, which is people literally passing them down generationally. The story of creation, the story of the Exodus. And the book of Genesis is comprised of material that covers like a millennia. It's the different sources, the Yahweh source, the Elohim source, they all span over a millennia. And that's when they were like recorded. That's not even counting like the centuries of people telling these stories over and over again and probably modifying them. All that to say that, the Catholic Church believes the Nag Hammadi library, or at least the Gnostic Gospels and texts within there, to be heretical. They are not part of the main Catholic canon. And of course, a lot of people take that to meaning like the church wants to suppress this, which is not untrue. The church doesn't really want you reading that.
You were talking about Catholic canon, right? And so we got to go all the way back to the creation of Catholic canon in the First Council of Nicaea, right? So like 300 AD. So the last 1700 plus years, the Catholic Church is like, we're not backtracking on this now. Like we have established this is the way it is, and we've gone to war and killed many, many people over this.
Well, and you have to understand too that during this early period, the earliest Christianity is what's called Judaic Christianity. So it's Jewish people, because Jesus was Jewish, who were following this other form. Christianity started as like a cult, essentially, of Jewish people. And, the Roman Catholics like to say they're the one true church. They're the first church. No, they won through wealth and power.
Yeah. They bought that right.
There were numerous Christianities, including the Gnostics. And you can look this up, but there's tons of other groups during this time period. And Roman Catholicism essentially wins out because it's the emperor's religion, but also it's the religion, the version of Christianity at the seat of power in the region, which is Rome. So that's where all your money is. That's where all your power is. I think it makes just sense when you really think about it in a historical context that like which one wins out? The one that's behind, that has all the wealth and power behind it. That just logically makes sense to me, and that's how it plays out. No one wants to hear that, but like that is, when you look at the history, that just makes sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely. No one wants to hear it. No one wants to come to face with that reality. But the Catholic Church has famously never come to face with their reality.
All that being said, in the counterculture of the late 60s, early 70s, these books start coming out about the Gnostic Gospels as part of the wave of kind of New Age material coming out. So you've got like books on like the occult coming out around this same time. A lot of people there are a lot of texts from like Eastern religions being translated into English that are being passed around. And so a lot of people in the counterculture are reading about the Gnostic Gospels and seeing it as like the counterculture version of Catholicism or Christianity. Like, hey, maybe this is where we went wrong. We could still pull from this and get inspiration from it, but maybe we're following the wrong Jesus. Maybe it's not that we need to abandon religion, but that like we've been following the wrong interpretation of it. And a lot of times I think when you see something like this, it's trying to point to a different way for the church to exist, because it's saying you don't need a building, you don't need an institution, you just need Jesus, which is not really consistent with like Catholic thought, because Catholic thought is not just that it's not that you just need Jesus, it's that you need the sacraments. You need, the Trinity is part of this.
Yeah, you can't convince somebody that they're going to go burn in hell if they don't go to church every Sunday, if you don't make going to church every Sunday incredibly important for their very much lives.
Yeah. So you can see how something like this would be threatening to the Catholic Church, right?
Go to the building. It's all about the building.
Go to the building.
No.
What messes it up for me is that I go into this movie for the first time knowing about the Nag Hammadi library and knowing about the Gnostic Gospels. And I'm sitting there going like, wait, is this about the Gnostic Gospels that they discovered in 1945?
And here I am being woefully ignorant of this fact and reading at the end being like, okay, so is this a bombshell? No, this is not. And everybody knows this already. And this,
well, that's the weird part. The end of the movie points out that they were discovered in 1945, which then says like, well, why is this being treated? Why didn't you set this movie in like 1950? Why is it set in 1999? That was confusing to me. I didn't understand why it's being. You could literally go buy a paperback book of translations of the Gnostic Gospels when this movie takes place.
I think the idea there was that Alameda and the other priests were studying the Lost Gospel from 45 all the way until 99, and they were about to drop the bomb on him when Alameda died. At least that was kind of my thought on it. Like, the church had done a good job of hiding this, but that it was a fully ripped scripture, right? The end of he digs out the scripture at the end, so we know that it was formed and written. So I think maybe that's
so. Chris? Do you think it was? Are they talking about like a part of it that had never been translated? Is that what the implication is, or were they implying that they had found the Nag Hammadi?
So I'm trying to remember, like in the story, like there's the different factions of the monks, right?
Right.
So every third page was given. So the Dominicans got some, the Franciscans got some, and then why can I not think of the third one right now?
Jesuits?
I can hear someone screaming.
Jesuits.
I can hear someone screaming at us right now on the other end of this podcast, listening, being like, "Why didn't you pay attention during the movie?"
It's a movie podcast, isn't it?
Damn it! I can do this better than these guys.
It's a lot of.
Yeah, well, and again,
it's religion, and that's the thing. It's like, and you're thinking of like, the different factions of like, who's the good faction in this one? Is it the Franciscans, the Dominicans?
Yeah.
Is it the Jesuits? So like in The Exorcist, it's the Jesuits. In Name of the Rose, it's the Franciscans. It depends upon the story and who your main character is. Like if it's Sean Connery, we're rooting for Sean Connery. If it's it's. But like, so that's the idea. And then like you got Father Alameda in Brazil has a copy. You've got his brother, Father Domenico, and then you got Boris the Butcher in New York.
Yeah, Boris the Butcher. I'm glad you picked up on that.
or Mr. Ilovich from Eyes Wide Shut.
Yep.
Like I can't think of his real name, but he's just a great character actor.
I always call him the Russian because that was his name in
the Russian. Yeah,
the Russian.
He is. He's the Russian. Yeah, he's Boris the Butcher.
Yep.
Or he's, Mr. Vilovich from, Eyes Wide Shut, who's, trying to sell his customer.
I don't know, he wasn't very convincing to me as a religious man of faith. He kind of like he came across as a
this kind of
skeezy Russian dude.
I mean, that's his vibe. Yeah. This is good at that vibe though, man. Like he was he kills that vibe.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, you got all these great character actors, in this movie.
I'm not going to try to pronounce his name.
Jonathan Pryce basically getting ready to play the role that he will, perfect in Game of Thrones.
I think you're going to say the two popes. Yeah, Game
of
Thrones.
I didn't see that yet. No. Yeah.
No, he plays Pope Francis. He's not evil.
Sparrow.
The Sparrow.
Yeah.
Right? Is that what they called him?
The High Sparrow. He's a shame.
Yep.
Well, is this the year is this the same year or the year after Tomorrow Never Dies, where he plays the villain, the Bond movie?
Tomorrow Never Dies was 98.
Okay, so he's coming off
or 97. So yeah, he's
coming off of that. Yeah, Jonathan Pryce, man. If you see him dressed as a priest, he's either going to be playing the Pope or someone evil. There's like no in between with that. Because he either is this like very kindly man or the most evil person. He plays both polarities.
Yeah, and you could tell right away from this film, right? He was just.
And then if you saw Something Wicked This Way Comes when you were a kid,
yes,
Disney.
Absolutely.
I mean, he's Mr. Dark.
Yep.
So yeah, he is an embodiment of evil to our childhoods.
Oh yeah.
And what's interesting is that is one of the few films that is not on Disney Plus.
I noticed that. Yeah, I remember the VHS tape. Remember the white clamshell Disney tapes?
Yeah.
Yep,
Mm-hmm.
I remember the white clamshell tape of Something Wicked This Way Comes. And yeah, that they made scary movies in the 80s. Disney made some creepy ass movies. Return to Oz is one of my favorites.
Oh man, that one.
I did a rewatching of The Black Hole recently, like maybe like a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
That is dark.
That's dark for me now as an adult. I watched it in a hotel recently and I couldn't stop watching it. I had to go to bed and I was like, nope, I'm going to watch The Black Hole all the way through. And man, the ending of The Black Hole is some of the most like just existential, dark Catholic space nonsense I've ever seen in my life. And
2001 meets Dante's Inferno.
Yeah,
basically,
yeah, it's like a less intelligent ending of 2001, but creepy as hell. I mean, impactful. Like, definitely scarred me when I saw it as a kid. Like, wait, I could end up in hell as with a robot. You know,
that's terrifying, right?
Yeah, I don't like
with
that.
Eyes.
Yeah, that's a movie. Oh, I keep floating the idea of we do an opposite of this podcast where we cover like children's films or family films that are actually either problematic or terrifying. And that's definitely on that list if we ever get to it.
There you go.
If I ever decide to do that. So maybe one day we can actually cover that. You know, one thing we've not talked about is the farmer's market scene where she gets the foot stigmata. And I think this comes back to your comment, Chris, about where does this take place? Because I've literally had coffee at this farmer's market, and it's like a famous Los Angeles landmark. It's like very, very conspicuous. Nothing else looks like this farmer's market in Los Angeles. You know, it would be like shooting in the Bradbury building, or the Bradbury or the building from Blade Runner. It would be like shooting in there and being like, we're in Pittsburgh. And it's like, no, we aren't. I know this building from Blade Runner. Stop. You know, what are you talking about?
Yeah. And if you look back at it, you're like, the only reason that this is here is because we need a bunch of flowers to make the line through about the smell of flowers for a stigmata. Is that why we are in this position right now?
You know, that's a good point. We've not talked about the flower smell that comes with stigmata, but stigmatics always are said to have their wounds smell of flowers. Padre Pio had it. St. Francis, that lady I talked about earlier, who I'm escaping her name. I'll pull it up in a second. But yeah, that's a possibility that it ties into and it's also just possible they wanted a location that was different, and
maybe
but it is weird like how little research they did into Pittsburgh itself.
Yeah.
To then shoot in LA, and I'm sitting here going like, I understand the budgetary reasons, but like you're shooting at a landmark. You're shooting at a place that anybody who's been to Los Angeles or watches Hollywood movies has seen this place. Why are we pretending?
Right.
It's 1999.
It seemed oddly specific too, because like even talking about the relay of information between the Vatican and New York City, like why not just make this in New York City then? Why do we have to go from Rome to New York City and then to Pittsburgh?
All I can figure out is maybe the writer is from Pittsburgh and it was important to him. But if you're not shooting in Pittsburgh, what's the point of being in Pittsburgh?
Maybe because maybe Father Andrew could hide longer because he's not next to the Vatican. I don't.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't. I have questions.
I do too.
I don't know if they'll ever be answered.
One,
from the director of Blank Check.
When she gets the wounds through the feet in this market, right?
Yeah.
This is probably the most terrifying one because it's just, it's a bright sunny day. They're just having a conversation and all of a sudden this just happens.
Right.
Whereas like all the other ones are kind of set up. They're kind of teasing it. But this one, it's just like, oh yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, the jump scare on that one a little bit more, right? It does
there's no jump scare here. This is just like a 2x4 across the face.
Never mind. I see what you mean.
It's like Eli Roth directed this scene or something.
Yeah.
It's like something right out of Hostel.
No, that's a good point.
Or it's like a Takeshi Miike movie. Like all of a sudden there's somebody with piano wire and she's eviscerating somebody.
Yeah, like Audition.
Yes.
Well, you figure they got to keep escalating. I mean, they have to keep escalating every wound, so it just gets worse and gnarlier. I think that makes sense to me. And following this, she's obviously it's getting crazier. Let's say, because after this, you have her trying to seduce Kiernan, one of the weirder, more oddly, I don't think well enough set up subplots in this movie is the sort of weird forced relationship between Kiernan and Frankie, which culminates in a seduction scene in her apartment where she tries to get him to kiss her. I just, a priest. Yes, we know priests fuck.
Right.
We 100% know that priests have sex. There are priests who will do stuff like this, but I have a hard time believing the way this is set up. This character is ready to throw away his entire calling, his entire priesthood, for getting romantically entangled with this person who obviously is troubled and has this stigmata. I don't quite buy the fact that he's going along with this at first when she does it.
Outside of her changing her voice to a male tone and inflection, I found myself finding trouble determining when she was either possessed by the brother's spirit or whether or not this was all just her own doing this on her own. Clearly, like from the original scene at the salon, she has sexual tension with him and is flirting with him.
Yeah.
But to the point of like, I'm going to try to seduce you. And now we get that the Exorcist style where she starts beating him up and throwing him across the room. And that's clearly being possessed. But still, this is supposed to be not malevolent. What's the other word I'm thinking of?
Benevolent.
Benevolent spirit, not a malevolent one.
Of a monk. I mean,
right.
That's the thing. The behavior.
So weird.
The behavior of the being possessing her makes zero sense in the context. It's almost like there were like some studio notes or something maybe saying like, hey, this should be more like The Exorcist. Why isn't she being violent? And it's like, well, it's a benevolent spirit. Okay, cool, but we need to put butts in the seats and sell tickets.
And it's Hollywood, so she needs to be sexual as well. She needs to try to kiss this guy.
Kind of textbook Hollywood popcorn movie where it's like, we need these elements. They don't have to make sense. They just need to be in there.
Yeah. We got the blood, we got the violence.
And again, I don't mind these elements being in there if they make sense. I just felt it was like unmotivated in this context.
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah.
It was terrible from that perspective. Like you couldn't rationalize the way that the story was trying to put you in this spot. Like, hey, this is a good guy who's doing good guy things and wants to expose the bad church, but they're being violent and all of these other things. It just didn't make sense for itself at all.
Yeah, that's why it was confusing. And then when they were exorcising her later, I figured like, oh, maybe it is like a malevolent spirit, and we've misread this, and maybe the Russian,
He's
Russian now. Boris is, maybe he's no, but maybe there's a misdirect there. Maybe there is a demon involved in this. Maybe it's not this guy, which I thought that's actually what I thought I remembered the ending of this movie being, was that it was like, I thought there was some shtick with like maybe one of the priests was satanic or something and had like worked with the devil to possess her. Yeah, I don't know why I remembered it that way, but it was college, so Lord knows how sober I was when I watched this.
I think the idea was like Houseman was the devil, right? If he was the one that was supposed to be the bad guy at the end, right?
Yeah, he was willing to kill to protect all the
he wanted to protect the church,
and traditions of the Catholic Church.
And I do like that.
You will not destroy my church.
Yep. No, I like that. I like the positing of like the evil is not the sort of like possession, like the demon or whatever. It's the very human hierarchical figure who's trying to protect the Catholic Church. Mm. I like that about this movie. I think that's great. Sure. I just was confused by the rules. As I talk about this a lot, I don't mind breaking rules, but I need to know what the rules are when we break them. Mm-hmm. And when we don't have the rules clearly established, it just gets confusing. Nope. It's like, why? One minute, okay, so it's a benevolent spirit, then why are we exorcising it? Now, it makes sense for Houseman to want to exorcise it because it's a spirit who's working against him in the service of God, right? But it also doesn't make sense that this spirit would make her violent or try to seduce a priest. That was very...
Absolutely.
It's like who's possessing her? I don't know. So I think that's the thing. They should have established the rules for the monk possessing her better than they did. It feels like a weird mix of The Exorcist and what this is trying to do, I think.
Yeah, especially because they kind of give you the question on whether or not Brother Alameda is the one actually possessing pretty much up until our climax. So,
but I think we can all agree that this is fun, though, right? I mean, Chris, we all pretty much agree this is a fun movie, right? Popcorn movie.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this thing is just sublime. It's
Yeah.
like, it takes you back to an era that no longer exists in film. It's
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
pre 9/11 world. It's the 90s. It's, everything's okay in the USA. All we had to worry about is our own government conspiracies. We're all harking. It's all going back to the X-Files.
Oh, yeah.
It's, the secret is out there. The truth is out there. And the cigarette man is, responsible for everything. And it just, I just like, it brought me back to where I was to when I saw it in the theater, probably like at like 600 North Michigan Avenue, or or maybe at the Fine Arts down there on South Michigan Avenue, or any of the old theaters that are unfortunately defunct. I mean, this wasn't arty enough to play at Esquire over there on Oak Street.
And as someone who's never even heard of this film, let alone watched this film before Bill asked me to be part of this, it just speaks so much to what I know about that style of film and that era. And I love a 90-minute just compact, straightforward, especially in an action or style popcorn flick. Like, just give me that compact, don't need too much overarching story or extra bits. And I think this film hit those notes for me for sure.
It doesn't overstay its welcome, which is really nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I feel like every film does that now.
And then since it's a stigmata, right? You're like, okay, there's only 5. We got 1, 2, 3, 4. Is she going to get number 5? Is she not going to get number 5? We're running out of time here.
Big question.
So she's going to get it. She's not going to get it, but she's already gotten 4. So it's either going to end or she's going to get it. We don't know. And then in that whole like scene as well, when like she's like brought up and levitated onto, a cross. And I was thinking about how like, Gabriel Byrne's character like pulls her down. Like he was, Mary or something.
There's
like
a lot
pulling
of
down
moments
Jesus.
In there.
It's like, this is really like, wow, this is really symbolic. This is a little heavy here. Now we're really getting, because like how she kind of falls into him and he puts her down in the bed. And
it's
like the scene where he's cleaning her forehead after the crowns, and it's the Mary Magdalene on the way to Golgotha, how she's literally cleaning his wounds. I was like, it's so intentional. It was wild.
And it's funny. Well, the levitation thing's always funny because that's actually, we'll get into this on the next episode about the Pope's exorcist. But, guys like Father Amorth claim that they've seen people levitate like this in exorcism cases. So it's not even just like a movie trope. It's a thing that exorcists claim really happens. There's no video of it ever, but they say it happens. So it's not just a movie trope, but it's also like a real, quote, real thing according to their testimonies. So,
which I guess is the whole point of this whole film, right? If stigmatas are real, quote unquote, if the Catholic Church's use of them to canonize saints are real, right? Is that the kind of question that we're asking at that point?
I think, and it's an interesting film in that it's a kind of silly popcorn flick that's touching on some very serious hot button issues.
Well, it got on this list for a reason, right, Bill?
Oh, yes, it did.
So yeah, and it touched on some hot button issues.
It did
for the Catholics,
and it could have ended with just the exorcism happening, and then the place burns down, or Jonathan Pryce gets taken to task or whatever, and it ends instead with Kiernan going back to Bella Quinto, and he locates the hidden Gospel of Thomas scrolls beneath the church, which confirms their authenticity, and that kind of wraps up with what we talked about earlier, the on-screen text that explains the 1945 discovery of the Gospel of Thomas and the Vatican's official rejection of it as heretical. Which, it's funny that like they went through all that effort in this movie to be like the church didn't want them to know it exists, and then it's like, oh yeah, by the way, the church just doesn't care. Like that's how they handle everything. It's heresy.
Nope.
We
say so because we can repeat it multiple times and everyone will listen.
Yeah,
we have the pulpit.
And real quick, I do want to talk about like just Frankie's outfits in this movie are so 1999. I remember seeing so many of these fashion designs and like these looks on people in 1999, if they were like, in New York and stuff, in magazines, or
Oh yeah.
if you were in the Detroit area, if you went to like Royal Oak or someplace like that, you would see women dressed like this. Not where I lived, but like if you went out of my area, you could see, people dressed like this, went out to like music shows or something. So that's very like the fashion and the look of things just really took me back too. And also like, God, you're right. The color grading of this owes so much to like The Crow and films like Dark City or Seven, like the sort of like bluish look, almost a little bleached, but not quite that digital looking bleach we're going to get in the early 2000s. There's just some really, it's a stylistically so stuck in 1999 in a fun way, like in a very nostalgic way. The editing drives me a little insane. I don't know about you guys. That was like my one big complaint about this movie.
I couldn't stand it. I thought that all of the cuts, all of the fadeaways, all of the end scenes, it felt like a TV movie where it was just waiting to go to commercial. It took me out of almost every scene that they used it in, and I just was like, I'm so glad we got past this as a use in film.
I think a lot of it, I don't know if this was, I assume this was edited on a nonlinear machine. This is probably back when non-linear systems were like specialized systems. Like you'd have like like the Avid Media Composer, which would be like a locally based server, and then you'd have a desktop to work on it with, or there were some other systems too. But I assume this is when every editor was just hyped on the fact that you had no longer had to use like the optical printer to do like crossfades or quick slams where you like can scale up the video really fast. And I think people were just out of control during this period, because I remember getting Final Cut Pro in college, getting access to it, and just going to town on like, oh, there's all these effects and transitions. And like, even like professors at university were like, oh, I lectured for a little bit at Columbia after I left grad school in like 2005 or 2006. And people would be like, well, show them how to use all the effects and stuff. And I'm sitting there going like, I don't really know that you need to know how to use most of these actually, because most of them have no purpose for 90% of the film work you're doing as making a short film. But yeah, I think people they were high on nonlinear editing as like a new technology, the freedom to be able to do stuff that you used to have to do through like, either double exposure processes or like photochemical processes. And now it's all in the box and you can do it there. And again, I don't know if this was edited that way, but it looks like it from what I can see. And I think that's why all of the crossfades, because suddenly you're not paying the lab for every single crossfade. Back in the day, you want to do a crossfade, you got to pay the lab every time you want to do a crossfade.
Interesting. I hadn't even considered that, but
yeah,
the overuse of it absolutely would lead me to believe that it was easier to do, and
yes,
therefore
absolutely.
They just were like, no, we're gonna do it.
100%. It was the style for music videos, but also a lot of it was just computer technology making it so much easier to now you can just drag and drop a transition. You can do a wipe, you can do a star wipe, you can do a vertical blind situation, or just keep doing crossfades for no good reason. The crossfades really drive me nuts in this. The dissolves, where it's just, which if you don't know what that is, that's like where one image kind of fades out and the other one fades in over it. If you're listening right now,
it reminds me of PowerPoint.
It's a lot like PowerPoint. But yeah, no, like I remember I had a professor in film school who was like, don't use crossfades in your work unless it's like to get in and out of a scene. Like there's no reason to have a crossfade between two pieces of film. And I mean, he was right. There are situations where it's like, I think of the brilliant scene in, is it The Godfather 2, I think? Or is it Godfather 1, where the mustache turns into a tree? I think it's The Godfather, because it's after Don Corleone is shot, but he's not dead yet. And we crossfade to Italy, and there's a tree. If you watch that scene, his mustache turns into a tree.
Huh.
That's a perfect use of a crossfade.
Okay.
No notes on that.
All right.
Go back and watch The Godfather. It's a great use of a crossfade. But that's like a very intentional use. This feels like they're just like, I can just keep throwing the crossfades into the timeline and it'll look like a big old mess. But I also like really fast cutting too. So there are times when it works for me in here and time. What's interesting about this movie is there are times where it feels like a complete mess of just nonlinear editing choices, and there are times where it feels beautifully intentional. I'm thinking specifically of the great scene where she sees the woman who looks like Mary, mother with child, in the street.
Yeah.
That scene is really well edited.
Yeah.
Which is why it's so weird when you go to a scene that's not. And then you go to that and you're like, this is really well put together. This is a really well structured scene.
Yeah, I remember my anxiety ramping during that scene as she's running across right after that, and be like, wow, I was actually emotionally invested there for about 30 seconds, oddly enough.
Well, and that's the thing. In the scenes where there's a lot of crossfades, the hospital is one where it just doesn't work. When she first lands in the hospital, they're working on her. There's all this intense music, and she screams. And there's no impact from the scream. And I'm sitting there going, like, if this was less busy or you dropped out to something and then she screamed, I can't even, like, I'd have to look at the footage to even know, like, how to make that work. But it just felt like there was, like, lost energy there because it was overly busy. Yeah. But then there are brilliant scenes in this movie where they just start, you're like, wow, this is really powerful. So it's cool to see the contrast between the two in this movie. It's not a perfect movie, but it's got some great stuff in it. And overall, like I said, this is a fun I had fun watching this. I had a blast. So I don't want to, like, sound like I'm crapping all over the movie. It's just, this is our job to, like, talk about, like, what works and what doesn't. So.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to look at it from a critical lens. That's the whole idea of when you're doing a movie review, and you have to take the things that you enjoyed while watching it and take the things that you didn't. And for me, I had no reference before this, right? So it's only what I'm seeing in the screen right in front of me and knowing that I have to review it for a podcast. I wish I would have seen this probably earlier and I had my own thoughts on it without having to sit down and be like, all right. Especially when we're talking about the religious side of the film as opposed to the, overarching directorial styles and things like that.
Well, speaking of the religious side of this film and looking at it through a critical lens, why don't we take a break and come back to find out what the Catholics had to say about this movie?
Seems interesting to me.
Back, guys. What did the Catholics say? Well, I have a review from one Mark Pattinson. This is from the Catholic News Services from Washington. It's titled, "More Than a Few Holes in Stigmata Plot," says priest. Forget the seemingly demonic possession in the new movie Stigmata. Forget that the lead character, an atheist, is receiving the stigmata from some unseen force, or that miracles and exorcisms go hand in hand, or in one case, hands on throat. What Catholics should be most concerned about in the film, says one priest, is the text displayed at the end of the movie describing the history and fate of the disputed Gospel of Thomas. Father Timothy Friedrichsen, a New Testament specialist at the Catholic University of America, said, "Stigmata was entertaining as far as it went until the text was shown on screen. The text says that the Gospel of Thomas was declared by the Vatican to be a heresy and that the Vatican has sought to suppress it. For one thing, the Gospel of Thomas has been available in bookstores for years and years," Father Friedrichsen said. For another, despite its discovery this century by archaeologists, it was likely known to early church officials at the time the New Testament canon was being formalized and didn't pass muster then either. The Gospel of Thomas was a text that was used among the Gnostic sects, said the priest, who was invited by the Catholic News Services to attend a sneak preview of Stigmata, which opened nationwide September 10th. The Gnostics, according to Father Friedrichsen, was a small group of early Christians who did not believe that Jesus was fully human in addition to being fully divine. They also put a high value on secret knowledge of Christ, he said. The Gospel of Thomas is a collection of sayings attributed to Jesus, the priest said, but without any narrative context that appear in the New Testament Gospels. While some scholars believe the Gospel of Thomas is an authentic work, others believe just as strongly that it is a 2nd or 3rd century derivation of the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, said Father Friedrichsen, a priest of the Diocese of Sioux City, Iowa. The Gospel of Thomas is not a heresy, he added, but people could construe that to be more important than anything else in the canonical Gospels. It won't likely harm the faith of a practicing Catholic, he said, but non-practicing Catholics or non-Catholics could be taken in by the text displayed at the movie's end as they would by a negative portrayal in Stigmata of a Vatican cardinal. The U.S. CCB rating is O for its dismissive treatment of the Catholic Church, depiction of murderous cardinal, a shadowy sexual encounter, frequent violence involving the stigmata and demonic attacks, occasional profanity, and rough language. Still, Stigmata has some good points.
Well, that's important, right?
All right, Chris, you're our guest. What did you think of that review?
That didn't make much sense, especially ideas like, well, Catholics aren't going to fall for this, but non-Catholics and non-practicing Catholics might find this Gnostic gospel like, oh, where like I remember like I saw it and I saw the, they say, this and this, and it's like, oh, that's interesting. I just like
Right.
really didn't even like think much of it. Like, oh, okay. But I mean, the idea like of, the concept of, there being a more spiritual, relationship between, the believer and Christ in this film, or in, the idea that, you take away the guy with the pointy hat in Rome and all of his red hat wearing buddies that kind of have run the way the things that go. I think my whole bit with this was learning about, I don't know, it's one of the whole theoretical hoaxes of Lent and the idea of eating fish on Friday.
Right.
And the idea that there was the concept of a bunch of like fish merchants saying, we need to do something because this stuff's starting to stink up the docks. And,
Yeah.
you gotta say some holy dogma, make it law that, for 40 days and 40 nights, the Catholics have to eat fish on Friday and no meat, because otherwise we're going to have a major crisis. And then like my father would say, he's like, oh, look at oh, you're suffering so much. Instead of having beef, you're having lobster. There's your fish on Friday. It's this whole kind of like hypocrisy.
Okay, so now you're making me wonder, does lobster count or not? It's a shellfish. It's not really it's like an arachnid almost, right?
I don't know.
It's
It's
lobster
an
seafood in
expression,
my brain.
and the whole bit that my dad would say.
Okay,
you can eat lobster
when, like,
on Good
everybody's
Friday.
all pious for the hour they're in church on Sunday, but the minute they get in their cars in the parking lot, they're at each other's throats.
Yeah, where the football game
And
starts.
These are exactly because they got to get home for the church is done, and now we're going to rush out of the parking lot because we got to get to the football game or watch the football game or brunch or wherever they're going. Afterwards like that.
My mom would always comment on Catholics who pulled through the parking space and parked outwards, and she'd be like, we don't do that. We park inwards because we're not those Catholics. And I'd be like, okay, Mom, cool.
What?
No,
like she was proud to not be like getting out of there too quickly,
Right. Or you'd always see the Catholics that would leave after the second collection would take in, or they leave right after the Eucharist, and they were the ones gone.
I mean, to be fair, I even like to the end of my Catholic years at like 38, I still as an usher was just like, fucking A, man. It's like,
get me out of here.
Fucking hang out for 5 more
minutes. I
minutes.
hope the fucking final song is short and I don't do the third verse on the way out.
Right?
It's interesting how this from this article, the review and the like, oh, it's got this. Oh, this is bad. Come to think of it, no, it's actually quite good. It's like this priest can't make up his mind. He's like,
well, I think he's doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
We spent all that time picking apart the editing, and then I was like, but this movie's a lot of fun. So, I mean, he's kind of doing the same thing we're doing, just differently. But
I mean, so is Pearl Harbor. Which incidentally
wait a minute
came out.
That's morally offensive.
Yeah.
Oh, the movie. I thought you meant actual Pearl Harbor.
No, I heard the movie too.
No, the movie.
Okay.
Is it's a cinematic mess.
Yes,
it is.
Of 3 hours of nonsense.
But if it's nonsense.
Is that a Michael Bay joint? That was Michael Bay, right?
Yeah.
No, that's Michael Bay.
Yeah. It is. Okay. I wiped it from my memory, so I was trying to remember.
No, it's but that attack sequence is dynamite.
That should have just been the movie.
Preview that they made.
Yeah.
It just pulls you in. It's got, from everything from the Boy Scouts peeing on the mountain.
Oh man, that shot.
You've got and then the zeros go by, and it's kind of the whole idea. It's like it's an edited mess, but it's a lot of fun.
It got me in the door as a kid into the theater, and then all of a sudden it was 183 minutes of what God is this? Like, my little brain was not handling that at all.
No.
So that movie broke down when I saw it the first time, and I didn't get to see the ending of it. So I had to go back and see it again for free. Talk about, cinematic, just torture in a sense, but you wanted to know what happened, what happened to these guys. But I know we've gotten majorly sidetracked, but incidentally, both films, both editing messes, but fun popcorn movies.
In one of the craziest loaded year for like quality movies that year too. I mean, this is like the year of The Matrix, the year of The Sixth Sense, Toy Story 2, Fight Club. So much. I think, does Election come out this year? There's so much stuff that comes out in this year. And for whatever reason, American Beauty won the Best Picture award. But like a lot of stuff came out this year. Wild year for cinema. And like this is a movie that just kind of like gets overlooked, I think, because of that. Because like so many quality movies came out in 1999, especially that summer, that it's like you forget that Stigmata's in with like all those behemoth films. And this is a fun movie. I had a riot. I had a blast. I'd watch it again. It was a good time. How much do you guys know about Stigmata? Like the actual phenomenon of Stigmata?
That's what we were going to talk about.
Yeah.
I'll be honest. Other than what it presents, and as a ministry song, no. I mean, it's a quality ministry song, which is Al Jorgensen saying "screw the church," at the end, and George Bush and Tipper Gore and all that.
Yeah, I'm relatively familiar, having gone through Catholic grade school where religion class was every day for 45 minutes or whatever it was.
Yeah,
we went through every book of the Bible, as you can imagine, all of the stories, all of the saints. St. Francis of Assisi was a huge deal. In fact, the nuns of my church were Franciscan nuns. So they were
so direct connection.
Direct, as far as they had. Anyway, so he was a very big deal, and he was someone that we studied at, not at nauseum, but at a large amount.
More than you should have.
As part of that story, you have to talk about the stigmata. I think that the reason that a lot of Catholics are either squeamish or don't think or talk about the stigmata is the idea of this benevolent God being violent towards the most devout of his flock.
Right.
If you love him so much, you're going to get holes in your hands. Like, yes, Jesus's wounds have always been kind of one of those moments with Catholicism where the Stations of the Cross are very much there for you to see all of the acts of violence against Jesus, to reminisce on them, to really make you think about them. Like to the point where we talked about Catholic guilt a little bit, like that entirety of the Easter masses, all of them make you feel like Jesus is dying for you because of you, of everything else that's going on there. Right?
When you were a kid, did you ever think about or have like nightmares about being crucified?
Oh my God. So I actually have a smaller story with that too.
You go ahead.
I was actually, I portrayed Jesus in the live action Stations of the Cross throughout my like junior high life. So I've literally fallen down with a cross on my back and the whole deal. And so, there was a part where I was pretty devout in my thoughts towards Jesus and all of that stuff. So
Chris,
in my hometown, where the community theater players were doing a version of Jesus Christ Superstar, I had nodded off during the performance, and it was like a group of our church went, and I did wake up to the shout and chants of "Crucify him!"
Yeah, crucify him. Yeah,
and I was like, "What? Huh? What? No, I'm awake. I'm awake. I won't fall asleep again." I think of like in certain neighborhoods, where it's the more like kind of like devoutly Orthodox, like Latin American, or when they do the Passion, in the street, where they really get into it in their roles.
They're like whipping people.
And then I also I also think of like the idea that the Stations of the Cross, the crucifixion, the whole stigmata element is supposed to be so torturous and so horrific, that the idea that the resurrection, in a sense, is so elevating and rewarding, and that the idea is like this is how horrible it is. But think about this: on the third day, he rose from the dead. I mean, Jesus was way cool, to quote King Missile. So
They try that though with us, and then you get kids like me who are just very focused on the sorrowful mysteries and the darkness, and like Good Friday is my favorite day of the liturgical calendar because the lights are off and it's spooky as hell, and people are making out with the cross for some reason and kissing Jesus's feet, and like, oh, it's so weird.
The first thing you do is they lay down. The
priests
altar
lay down
people
on the altar.
We lay down face down, and I too was
and it's quiet.
I was an altar boy. Yeah,
so much incense
in my church. One time we actually I think it was Easter Sunday, dropped the incense on the carpet and here's myself.
Yeah, I've been there. Yep.
And the priest, and we're stomping out the coals, and and let our church too, we were even responsible, got to be the guy to pass the chalice to people. Here you go.
My favorite story of being an altar boy is my mom famously would tell me that there was one time where the priest had a really bad breath, really, really, really bad breath. He would smoke cigarettes and had awful bad breath. And I was holding up the lectern or whatever, the actual book. Can't remember. Anyway,
the gospel book, that book was heavy.
I actually had to hold
I forget the name of it.
It was a really long gospel, and I had to hold it there, sat there reading it the whole time.
So that's like an old school church, because they don't do that in most modern Novus Ordo, regular Catholic churches.
Yeah, no, it felt very old school, and it felt to the point where it was so long that I was either going to pass out from having my legs clocked for so long, or the stench of the priest's breath was going to knock me out. Anyway, I turned away after closing the book, and my mom said I gave the most stank face to the entire everybody in looking just
classic.
Yeah.
Did you guys have the little bells you had to do too, the ringy bells?
Different moments in the service, the bells ringing would signify certain stations or certain things that are occurring, depending whether it was Easter, whether it was Christmas, whether it was Advent, Lent, Holy Week.
I always was terrified to see if we would travel or go to a different church for something. I was terrified to see the kids with the bells who were my age, because it meant that most likely they only would do communion on the tongue, because I experienced that at the Lebanese Maronite church. Whenever somebody died, we had to go to the Maronite church. So first of all, the mass is in Aramaic, so I know one word, and that's Amen, and I don't know anything else. I can't read the language, and but I look like everyone else. It's that weird thing of I'm these people, but also totally not, because I'm American as hell. And I remember just being I don't want to go to communion because I know they're going to make me kneel, and the Lebanese priests, at least at the churches we went to in the Detroit area. You didn't have an option to put your hands out. They were oh, no. This finger go in your, it's going straight to your mouth. And I'm sitting there going no one in first communion class taught me how to do this. I only know how to use my hands. So I'm do I stick my tongue out? Do I not? Do I open wide? What happens if it falls out and then on the ground, and they got to do the whole thing where they they got to put it on their vestments and carry it back. And then I'm in trouble because I dropped Jesus. Yeah. I mean, there's all these I'm an anxious kid, so I'm thinking through all the worst possible scenarios.
And for me, I always remember the kids who took it on their tongue and not in their hand were always the most the super religious kids, the ones that had huge families, or their parents kids. Were it was almost oh my God, they're talking. You know what you're doing, right? It was weird.
Yeah, but also I feel bad for those kids because they probably had more trauma than I did.
Oh, absolutely.
And of course, those are the families and the types of churches where you had people who were these true believers in the stigmata. You go to your regular church, most people don't think about or talk about the stigmata ever. You go to a trad church, people are obsessed with mysticism and that type of Catholic mysticism specifically. I shouldn't say all mysticism, but the stigmatists, Fatima, Medjugorje, all that stuff. And Padre Pio is one who pops up so often because he's so recent of a stigmatic, and he had such a cult of personality around him, to the point that the church was becoming worried about how much of a following this guy had. They recently made a movie about him, directed by Abel Ferreira. I believe, Chris, you brought this up on our break, starring Shia LaBeouf of all people. And it sounds like nobody liked the movie. It sounds like the Catholics hated it, and then nobody else saw it. So
I didn't see it. I didn't see it. I didn't even know that Abel Ferreira made this film. It's news to me. And then you guys mentioned, it was Bad Lieutenant, talking about bleeding statues and, other horrific imagery in a church, and, Harvey Keitel like betting on the Mets and other dubious
Right.
activities circa early 80s as a corrupt lieutenant in New York City.
That's why it's so weird thinking about him. But I guess he's very interested in spirituality and like Padre Pio specifically. I was curious about the movie, but I really think he shot himself in the foot by casting Shia LaBeouf, because like nobody because it was about Padre Pio, a lot of Catholics were interested in it. And obviously Shia LaBeouf is now kind of a like weird cause celebrity among Catholics because he's converted to Catholicism because of this movie. So it was like a big deal. And then it came out and they were kind of like, eh. And nobody else cared. This is Shia LaBeouf. And I wouldn't say he's canceled, but he's not exactly somebody people are like flocking to see in cinemas right now. Mm-hmm. So like it was just a weird choice to
all because
him.
He kind of looks like him. Like look at that image looks like Shia LaBeouf
does
from afar.
Look like Shia LaBeouf. Here,
I'll
turn it so you can see it there, Chris. Let me know if you can see this. But this is him as a young man with the stigmata. He supposedly.
I remember seeing that. That's in the credits, the opening credits of Stigmata.
Yep,
is they show that image,
and that's him very young.
To that, this is the Alameda guy. Like they were kind of blending fiction with reality.
Yeah, and the church claims that there was no Brother Alameda, right? And there is no church in that town.
There is no church in that town.
So maybe that's part of it.
Correct.
Yeah.
And Padre Pio is one of these guys where it's just like there's so many conflicting stories. I mean, he had these stigmata his whole life. He usually kept them covered in bandages, though. So like, it is possible a lot of the time he just had like fake blood on there and then would like, have nothing going on underneath. But they inspected him numerous times. He was observed at the University of Rome. His wounds were observed. They were described as shallow wounds that would bleed. And like a lot of different people, I guess, examined him, but it seems like the thing with the Vatican is it seems like when they quote examine these people or look into these things, it feels like it's usually somebody who's a Catholic already and who's a true believer. So you're not dealing with somebody who is seeking out to really be skeptical and try to figure out the truth. It's just like they need somebody to come in and add, give it some kind of like credibility, right? Somebody to lend it credibility. And I think that feels like a lot of the Padre Pio case. What's interesting is, one of the big criticisms of his stigmata is the accusation that he was using carbolic acid to make the wounds, as well as something called Veritrine, which evidently he was getting without a prescription, which I guess Veritrine normally you'd have to get with a prescription, but he didn't have a prescription for it, which is technically, I guess, illegal. I don't really know how that works or how that all played out. But basically, there are both Catholic and non-religious and non-Catholic critics who say that he faked the stigmata. So it's not just non-Catholics or atheists saying this. It's Catholics and Christians saying, we're pretty confident that Padre Pio was self-harming and creating these stigmata to essentially either, maybe he had some health stuff going on where he just felt like maybe he wanted to be holy, so he caused the stigmata, or maybe it was to get attention. But it feels like there is a lot of pushback against this idea that this was legit, even though the church presents Padre Pio stigmata as being legit. And the problem I have with the Catholic Church and how they determine things to be miracles or whether a stigmata is legit or not is they don't do the best job at ruling out every possible rational explanation. As soon as they have enough to explain that it could have happened through supernatural means, they kind of just jump on that, and they don't really try that hard to like debunk it. Because here's my thing. If the stigmata were real in all of the 20th century cases where we have photos of people where we know people were around with the stigmata, you would think scientists would be all over it, right? It's like Eucharistic miracles is the same thing. If hosts were really bleeding human blood and being shown to have human blood, it doesn't matter how many scientists there are that are atheists. First of all, there are a ton of Christian and Catholic scientists. Secondly, even the most like skeptical scientist would want to study that if it was legit. And it gets painted as this thing as like science wants to suppress the truth. And it's like, no, you guys didn't, there's not enough rigor to how you're studying these things, and you're just jumping to conclusions. And I think stigmata, it's the same. I mean, The interesting thing I found out about stigmata in researching this episode is most stigmatics, at least in terms, or I believe that's the correct term, stigmatics, yeah. Most are women. About 80 to 90% of them are women. And did you find that too, Kevin, kind of looking through this stuff?
Yeah, at least some of the famous ones, the ones that are often portrayed by the church.
Sister Romolda's one. You know, you've got a lot of different people on the list.
No, we've been talking just about two main ones that are men, but I would say that, yeah, a lot of the historical Catholic doctrine has those female folks in there.
And evidently there is also non-Christian stigmata, which I'd never heard of before, but it's not that surprising that other religions would have something similar to the stigmata. There's supposedly a Buddhist variation on this. Spiritualist mediums have produced stigmata, although famously we know most spiritualists were basically Victorian era magicians, and a lot of what they did was sleight of hand and illusion. So I'm going to be very skeptical about the mediums producing any kind of stigmata in that time. I'm sure that was all sleight of hand. And also there are some other groups as well. So, you know, it's not limited to Catholicism. Obviously it's not the same thing. It's not the wounds of Christ per se in those cases, but I also didn't know that. I forgot that Anneliese Michel, the victim of the famous Anneliese Michel exorcism case, actually displayed stigmata. So maybe that's an inspiration for the fact that she has stigmata in this movie and they perform an exorcism on her. Because Anneliese Michel was actually killed through malnutrition, through these two priests exorcising her and allowing her to die of malnutrition.
Wild.
Basically, while trying to exorcise her during this process. And it seems that she also had stigmata. So that's interesting. And now I'm starting to think, looking at this information, if maybe that's the inspiration for having her treated with an exorcism in this movie. But I don't know. I mean, this movie has a lot of ideas.
And the idea, too, that, like, you know, Jonathan Pryce's character husband's like, we're going to take care of you now. You know, you're going to be in our care, you know, where it's like the nuns are treating her and then they leave the room, you know, and then, you know, they go in the room and they're ready to go with their Max von Sydow outfit.
The other interesting thing for me about stigmatists is a lot of them have other types of magic phenomenon associated with them. Therese Newman was professed to have something called inedia, which is the idea of someone who has consumed no food other than the Eucharist, and in some cases not drank any water. In the case of Therese Newman, evidently from 1923 until her death in 1962, she only consumed the Eucharist. And she hadn't drank any water from 1926 until her death, which is impossible.
It's impossible.
That's just impossible. I'm sorry. And it's interesting, too, because evidently there were times when she'd be under observation and she would like lose weight and gain weight, and they'd go back and she had gained like a bunch of weight in like a day or two. And it seems like, oh, she's healthy now. And it's like, yeah, she probably snuck some freaking snacks in the middle of the night. You guys should have been keeping an eye on her, you know? Like,
or Padre Pio had the ability for biolocation. So he could show up in multiple places at once.
Sure,
like,
he did.
What?
Yeah, that's some nonsense. I'm sorry, that didn't happen.
And levitation, and he could read people's hearts, quote unquote.
You know, here's all I'm going to say. We live in the age of cell phones. It's not really that shocking that the frequency of these things has gone down since the invention of the cell phone and the internet. And I feel like if this stuff was happening with the type of frequency it seems like it was happening in the past, which isn't like incredibly frequent, but enough that now there would be cell phone footage. If some motherfucker started bilocating, people would have their cell phone cameras out.
Yeah.
Okay, like there'd be timestamps. We'd have evidence.
You'd be able to see it.
There would be people on TikTok doing think pieces about it. Like that's the thing that kills me about this stuff. It's like if somebody had stigmata today, we would have video of it. But now what scares the living hell out of me with AI is that now once AI gets good enough to really start, it's already starting to fool old people, okay?
Yeah.
Once it starts fooling people in our generation, we're screwed because you're going to see people, I'm not even like guessing this is going to happen, but there will be Catholics, trad Catholics and religious, like very religious Catholics who will start making fake videos of people with the stigmata using actual photos of real people or actual footage of real people, doctor it to look like they have the stigmata, and they're going to start presenting this stuff as evidence for stigmata. Because I've seen this with exorcism already. I've seen actually a few years ago, someone online was trying to convince people of exorcism, and all these people were sharing these videos. And my smart ass goes, and this is kind of what leads me to this podcast, actually, is like doing this stuff online and just fact checking weird stuff I see, and then being like, why am I not doing a show about this? Because I do this all the time anyway. Turned out the guy had taken promo trailer footage from a Russian horror film about exorcism and was passing it around to these religious like Reddit forums and stuff like it was like legit exorcism footage. And it's just like, you can Google that shit. Like, you can reverse Google the image of that video and find out what it's from originally. You can find the source. It's not that, but most people don't have that time or take like just the moment to be like, especially I feel like with religion, we trust our fellow Catholics so much of the time. We're like, I'm not going to question this. When I was a kid, I didn't question like, is Medjugorje real? Is Fatima real? I was just like, well, they told me, the priest says it's real, it must be real, right?
Yeah, and all my adult role models in my life all say it's real. All my parents, all my uncles and my aunts.
My grandma has like devotions
Boy
to it.
Scout, Scoutmaster, like all of them.
They do a Fatima parade down my street from the church, you know,
my
like
great grandma came off the boat from Czechoslovakia and had giant statues of the Virgin Mary around her whole house.
So why would you not believe it?
Exactly.
Right. So anyway, yeah, stigmata is interesting because it is such a weird thing. Like it's a thing that exists. It's a phenomenon, but like no one's really taken the time to try to like really, really be skeptical. And I hope like the next time one of these cases becomes prominent where you get a cult of personality, like I could see like a TikTok Padre Pio happening at some point where an influencer is building I think about this stuff way too much, but like a TikTok influencer getting stigmata, building a cult following the way that like, I mean, the Vatican was worried about Padre Pio at some point being like, this cult of personality is getting too big. The devotions are getting too crazy. And like, I could see somebody getting to the point where they build like a cult Catholic following online claiming to have stigmata. And if that happens, some good person with the money to fund it needs to get all the just a bunch of third party skeptics and scientists on it and just debunk the living hell out of it. Because, and it may seem, you may say, why would we do this? And I don't know, like, Kevin, I feel like, don't you feel like this is the kind of thing, like when we don't debunk it and when it becomes belief, this is what leads people to believe in all sorts of crazy things.
Yeah.
Like QAnon. I mean, you think I'm joking, but
no, I don't. So I guess for me, it's easier to be skepticism because I've disavowed all of the things about the Catholic Church, right? Anything about the idea that Jesus, was the Son of God, or that he died or resurrected for 3 days, the idea of eternal life, like all of these things, I'm a complete skeptic of. So the idea of having the stigmata is like, not even,
right.
So we laugh off these other things, but there are other folks we talked about early in the episode where it's like it's all they know. It's just their entire, identity is surrounded by these things, and to question that would be like to question your own self.
And I guess that's the counter argument is it worth it putting that energy into it, guys, if those people might not even, if you had all the evidence in the world, they're not going to believe you and they'll just keep following.
Absolutely. We see that time and time again throughout all of society. You have all the evidence in front of you, but it doesn't matter. You're just going to ignore it for well,
I'm going to go cry into a glass of whiskey tonight.
I'm right behind you.
That ties to, finishing off, tying it back to the film Stigmata, is the idea that the kingdom of God is inside you. You can be at one with this religion. You can be a part of this. You don't have to have, an interpreter on a high altar making it for you, but you can bring it to yourself. You can have this relationship with your God. You don't have to wake up early morning on Sunday, fight traffic, be with a bunch of people that, you don't even see other than you see them on Sunday. They're the people you go to church with. They're not even, or they're in your community. I don't know. But I mean, like here, like if you think about St. Patrick's Cathedral, right, that only the most influential and rich people are the ones that are actually probably really getting the seat on Christmas, mass, midnight mass, at St. Patrick's or at Holy Name Cathedral, and it's the whole idea that this is like this Gnostic gospel that they're talking about, the counterculture. It's like, you don't need all the pomp and circumstance. You just need to find this within you.
Well, in my experience, when you do that, they call you a heretic. So
Mm-hmm.
you just got to be really comfortable. You just got to get comfortable being called a heretic. That's all.
Yep.
I already know that me, like 15th century, I would have been burned at a stake.
Mm-hmm.
No
doubt.
You and me both, brother.
We're all going to be there.
We're all going to get burnt at the stake. Well, if things keep going the way they're going in this government right now, I don't know. We might all get burnt at the stake still.
Right, one way or another.
Don't really cross your fingers.
Time for a beer.
Well, anyway, Chris, we're going to go have a beer, but thank you for joining us today.
You're very welcome.
It's been great.
Thank you for having me as a part of your as a part of this podcast and this discussion, this discourse.
Always good to see you, man.
Likewise.
Pleasure to meet you, Chris.
Likewise. Enjoy your beer, fellas.
Well, Kevin, Chris had to go, but I have to ask you, does this film get your imprimatur? Would you recommend it to somebody blind?
I would. I think that it represents a very unique spot in cinematic history, as well as the unique crossover between some of the Roman Catholicism deep canon that you see and some of the modern interpretations of that religious word. I think that Catholics going into this are going to have a totally different takeaway than agnostics or atheists going into it. I think that they may know that it's on some sort of list, right? They may know that the Legion of Decency had an opinion, or they would have had opinion if they were still existent in this time of period. And I've read some reviews where they were like, "Oh, I'm not offended," and other Catholics where they were like, "I'm totally offended, and this is against everything that they've taught." So I would recommend it for folks that want to see just a wild movie that was, like we have talked about, a popcorn flick.
It's a good popcorn flick,
but it does ask some good questions. I honestly think it does, and it makes some good discussion.
Yeah, it's it's not on the intellectual level of something like The Exorcist, where Friedkin was realistically trying to portray exorcism up to a point, but at least the process of leading up to it and the way that the priest would handle it. This is more fantastical. It's totally like an all 90s rock horror movie, essentially. It's like it's like if I don't know, it's like a 90s rock album as horror movie, essentially. And I like it. It's really fun. It's a good time. Go into it not expecting it to be accurate to like
right.
If you're Catholic or ex-Catholic and you know your stuff, just kind of leave that at the door.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Catholics get really bent out of shape when their stuff is represented poorly in media, and I get it, but also like it's a silly horror movie. Go have fun.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Don't try to take it too seriously at the end of the day.
Yep. And some great fashion inspo in this too. I mean, it's got some good stuff. Billy Corgan soundtrack.
Yep.
Needle drops kill it. I mean, it's just got a lot to recommend it.
Yeah, if you are listening to this right now and you've never seen this film, well, go obviously watch it.
Yeah, and on that note, we are still doing Hot Pre-Summer. If you haven't checked out our merch site, check out the merch store tab on our website, www.morallyoffensive.com. If you go on the website, it takes you to our Podbean landing page, and up at the top you'll see merch store. Click on that; it'll take you over to our Big Cartel store where we have brand new merch I just released for Hot Pre-Summer. We've got t-shirts, tanks, a swimsuit. We also have new hats that say #DinkLife in honor of Cisco. For those of you who are double income, no kids, I'm probably going to be getting one. And yeah, we got our standard merch there too. Lots of good stuff. And we brought the prices down to a more affordable price point. We're trying to figure out the best balance between because they raised the prices on our product, unfortunately, just because of the current tariff situation. But we're trying to be fair and keep prices low. And I was like, well, what would I spend on a t-shirt? And I tried to think about it and approach it that way. And people are loving the t-shirts. So check it out. We have tote bags too. Lots of good stuff.
Yeah, I have to get a t-shirt now.
You should definitely get a t-shirt.
Yeah.
Well, that about wraps it up for this episode of Morally Offensive. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, subscribe to the podcast. This absolutely helps us gain traction and raise awareness about the show. detailed reviews and comments, always super helpful on Apple Music. Spotify now has comments, which are really handy. And it's a great way just to let us know that you're listening, or even just like feedback is always good. And please, if you want to fact check us, hit me up on like TikTok or Instagram. That's all in our show notes, the links to those. And just let me know, like, hey, you said this one thing about this historical item you didn't quite get right. Just let me know. I have no pride in that matter. I like being fact checked because I am constantly finding out things that maybe I wasn't necessarily completely wrong about, but I was just off base about something, or I missed in another important perspective. Let us know. We're interested in that. We want to be fact checked. Just be kind about it, please. Don't be a dick. And on that note, join us again in 2 weeks when we will be continuing our Hot Priest Summer series with a film which sees Russell Crowe combining his divorced dad energy with the most Super Mario Brothers Italian accent this side of House of Gucci. We are watching The Pope's Exorcist.
Here we go.
And as always, go and sin no more.